Watercolor pencils can make or break your paintings, and there are a lot of average ones out there. So in this video, I'm going to share what to look for in a watercolor pencil, what brands I recommend, and how to use this tool to its full potential. Hi, I'm Françoise. Welcome back to my channel. I just bought a box of the Derwent watercolor pencils, and I thought that would be a great opportunity for me to share with you my process to tell a good from a not so great watercolor pencil rather than doing a simple product review. And I am not sponsored by Derwent. I'm just mentioning this again because lately I've been reviewing a bunch of their products just because I love them and I wanted to try them out. On the box, it says that these watercolor pencils are professional pencils and that they're highly pigmented. So if that's true, then it's promising for this experiment. And the first thing that I think is going to help the most to ensure that you're gonna have success with your watercolor pencils is to aim at buying a small set so you don't overwhelm yourself with all the colors. And I picked this 24 pencil set because it has the white pencil in it, and you'll see how I use it later and why I really wanted to have it. But a 12 pencil set would have been enough otherwise. And that's actually great news because it means that even as a beginner, it's possible to invest into higher end watercolor pencils without breaking the bank if that was the best option for you in the end. The price of a watercolor pencil set might not be the most reliable way to tell for sure if these pencils are high quality or not, but I've found that most times it does reflect that. For example, I tried very cheap pencils from Bic before. I'll link the video about them in the description if you want to watch it. And even though I managed to get something out of them, I could tell they weren't the best and they were not that easy to work with. I also tried the Winder & Newton watercolor pencils, and I actually disliked them so much that after painting something that I absolutely hated in the end, I decided not to even share to YouTube at all. In more of a mid-price range of watercolor pencils, I tried the Staedtler Karat, not sure how to pronounce this. I had read a lot of positive things about them in various places, and after trying them out, I thought they were okay, but they didn't deliver like the top brands that I like for reasons that I'll share next. I already have favorites too. The Faber-Castell Auberge d'Or and the Caran d'Ache Museum Aquarelle, both renowned and pricier than the rest. So when I heard that Derwent had their own watercolor pencils, I knew that I needed to try them out because it's one of my favorite brands, and I actually made a bunch of videos on their Inktense water-soluble pencils, and I even tried their watercolor paper in the previous video I made. So how do you tell good from not so good watercolor pencils? The first step that I like to take is to actually try them out rather than reading all the details about those pencils on the box or just reading reviews on Amazon. But in any case, I would stay away from super cheap watercolor pencils. And just so you know, I'm not going to talk about light fastness ratings in this video, which means if the pigments are going to be resistant to exposure to light long term, just because I paint more for fun and not really to sell my art. So what I like to do is just simply make swatches of the colors, because at least if they're terrible, then I won't waste time on an entire artwork, even though sometimes I do like to push my limits. And if you're familiar with the channel, you might have seen this video recently where I was trying pastel watercolor pencils and having a hard time with them. So when I swatch the pencils, I get an immediate feel for the pencil itself, and that is to know if it feels dry or if the pigment comes easily. And in the Derwent watercolor experiment you're watching right now, I was happy to feel that they were creamy, easy to color with. That is the first indicator of quality in my own experience, because dry pencils will be not only tough to color with, but you might also indent the paper badly by just trying to get pigment to stick to the sheet. With swatches alone, there are two more things that you can see instantly. Do the colors look nice when you blend them with water? And by nice, I mean vibrant enough. And in this case here, I found that they appeared a little bit lighter than my top favorites, Faber-Castell Auberge d'Or and Caran d'Ache Museum Aquarelle, but they were pretty decent. And something else that you can look at are the streaks below the blended pigment. Are there many, or do most of them go away with the water? Here they did, most of them went away, and so that was another sign for me that I had the green light to start painting. And you'll see how your supplies do while painting better than in a small swatch, so that's always the most important part. After making so many videos about watercolor pencils, I've learned that the best way to test a new box of pencils is to try a landscape, or at least something with a blurry background and a subject in focus, because that is going to allow us to test a wide range of techniques. And that's why I picked this photo. And the colors here are really flashy, and that's not what I usually paint. I don't usually like these colors, but I felt like doing something different, and I knew that this would be good to assess these Derwent watercolor pencils. To paint blurry, watercolor-like backgrounds, I make swatches of my chosen colors on a plastic palette with a rough side. You can also use watercolor paper and get the same results. And I noticed that these were easy to swatch because they're creamy, and that really helps. Because dried pencils make it really difficult to do this step. Because imagine that when you have dried pencils, it's really hard to even get any pigment out onto your palette. Then on wet paper, they were nice to paint with, and the colors looked just fine too. Nothing out of the ordinary compared to what I'm used to. I noticed that the red that I picked in my set was a bit weak. I would have liked it more intense. Blue could also have been slightly more pigmented. I was happy with yellow, however. But all of that didn't hinder my process at all. But it's just a detail to watch for, just because highly pigmented pencils will make your experience feel more fun and a painting look a little better. Compared to the Winsor Newton and the Staedtler, these Derwent watercolor are actually pretty good, close to my favorite brands so far. A great way to test your watercolor pencils even better is to layer them on top of each other, and that's why next. After drying the paper completely, I wet the paper again and I added more color. And this helped me fix the lack of vibrancy with reds and blues. It was easy to do in just 2 layers, while with the worst watercolor pencils ever, that would be very hard to achieve. Something awesome with these pencils is the ability to lift color even after a second layer. The color won't lift easily when you just add water to a dry layer, which is great. But when you use the lifting technique intentionally, that you press a little harder on a certain area to pick up some of the pigment, like I did here with the sun, it works really well, and the paint actually comes off. And you can see how much I managed to improve the sunset effect with this technique alone. And if you're enjoying this so far and you would like to learn to paint with watercolor pencils using my techniques, I offer many tutorials on my Patreon, including this one, and you will find a link to it in the description of the video. I was happy with my background, so the next step for me was to try these pencils through the coloring technique on dry paper, and you'll see that we're going to learn a lot more because this technique is completely different. When you color directly on paper, depending on what you do, it might be a good idea to sharpen the leads. And this is a great indicator of a watercolor pencil's quality. Is it easy to sharpen? These actually were, but look at the wood. It's completely gone in places and breaking all around. I've never seen it with even cheaper watercolor pencils, so I was a bit surprised. I wasn't expecting that, especially because these Derwent watercolor pencils were doing pretty good so far. That didn't prevent me from coloring normally though, so I kept on working. I overlapped colors on top of each other and I activated the pigment right on paper this time, which helps with more opacity and more vibrancy in general than when we paint on wet paper. It went very well and I managed to paint what I had in mind, and overall I didn't find any obstacles to the process. So even though at this point I could clearly tell that these pencils aren't as qualitative as the types that I mentioned before, the Faber-Castell Arbor Stir and the Caran d'Ache Museum Aquarelle, they're doing what you need them to do, and they're a bit more affordable too. Underneath the blended details, you can see the streaks slightly, but it's not entirely smooth. But even top watercolor pencils have that effect with the coloring technique, and it's actually charming in a way because it gives the painting a unique look. For the branches, I dipped the lead in water to soften the pigment, and I pressed hard enough to paint them. With watercolor pencils that aren't that great, A common problem you would be seeing when you press harder on the pencil itself is lead breakage. Here I didn't have that problem at all, despite the weird condition with the wood, which is a good sign. One thing that also helps me decide about the watercolor pencils I like and those that I don't like is the white pencil. Top watercolor pencils allow me to place noticeable highlights with a white pencil, whether I wet the lead or use it like a colored pencil. Here I actually had a harder time, and the pencil didn't show as much as I would have liked. So once more, there was a little pattern here with colors not being as intense as I wanted them to be. But overall, I would still say that these pencils in particular are my next best discovery after Faber-Castell and Caran d'Ache, although they are not as enjoyable in my experience and they don't even feel as expensive, just the box itself and the pencils themselves. It can be a nice alternative to the other two, however. The way that the art turned out is not my favorite because of the strong colors, but I knew that from the start, so I would not judge watercolor pencils by the overall looks of the art. This was a fun experiment. I hope you enjoyed it. You can watch this video next to learn more about my favorite brands. Otherwise, I'll link my growing watercolor pencil playlist in the description of the video. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.